Okay. You're back, Carrie. Okay, good, super. So Carrie, Annabelle, Carrie, and it's only the two of you all tonight, which is kind of nice. Did you find everything on your homework to get your camera all set up?
I did not.
You did not?
I did do the homework, but I didn't find everything.
Okay, okay. Well, we're going to try to find it tonight while we're going through class. The wonderful thing is that both of you are Canon users and both of you use Rebels. And so, Carrie, you've got the Rebel 1 and Annabelle, you've got the Rebel 7, but they're virtually the same camera. They've just got a little bit of a difference in them. And so as we're looking for a feature on a camera, each one of you should be able to find it on your camera. And both of you all have your cameras handy, right?
Yes.
Okay, good, because you're going to learn how to use your camera. This isn't theoretical anymore. You're going to learn how to use your camera. If you all don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start because you're both here. So there's no reason just to sit around. This is being recorded. So tomorrow I will share the recording with you. And that way, if you need to, you can rewatch a certain portion, or if you missed a certain portion, you can go back and rewatch it. And then you noticed also that you have homework. And then I will see you back here again Tuesday night next week. And same time, same place. I'll send you a new Zoom link though, just so, you know, for security purposes. And I'll send you a new Zoom link and then you'll get to show your homework. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we can talk about how you did on your homework assignment or how you didn't do on your homework assignment, whichever one it might be. And then we'll continue on with lesson 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin and get rolling with this one. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, super. Okay. And by the way, that you're an adult. And so if you've got a question, ask. I've been teaching the photography now for going on 26, 27 years. And so I do not mind if you interrupt me. If I'm going to cover it later, then I'll just tell you I'm going to cover it later. But if something pops into your mind or if you need me to clarify anything, please just feel free. It's all right. Just the two of you all. So it's only 3 of me, 3 of us. So just, you know, feel comfortable and feel relaxed tonight. So what I'm going to do for the next 2 sessions with you all is I am going to teach you how to use your camera. I'm not going to teach you the theory of it. I'm going to teach you the real life how to do it. And one of the reasons that I'm going to do that is because you have to learn how to use your machine. It's going to be a bit of a challenge because I'm teaching you how to use this in the manual mode. And I'm teaching you the 4 components of photography, which are light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. Those are all on the handout that I sent you also. So if you look on that basic photography handout, then these are the 4 things that I'm going to teach you. And why I'm going to teach you light meter, f-stop, light shutter speed, and ISO is because when that parrot goes flying by in front of you and you want to take a picture of it, you cannot tell it to stop until you get your act together and figure out whether you need to rotate your light meter, or do you need to rotate your shutter speed, or do you need to rotate your f-stop? Which one of these do you need? And it's the same thing if you saw that lioness raise her head out of the grass. You cannot tell her, wait, let me get my act together with my camera. You have to know this. And so it's, you know, you see something that you really want to take a picture of, tall masted sailing ship coming through the harbor in Venice, or even something like the Milky Way out in Big Bend National Park, where I lead some workshops. Maybe Carrie, before you leave the United States and go back to Canada, you can go out to the Big Bend area, which is just totally different part of Texas.
Yeah.
So we did some workshops out there. Or you see something as cute as the kids across the table doing something adorable. If you know, try to sit there and bumble around with your camera, you're going to miss it. And so you've got to know these 4 components: light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. And then as you start developing your skills, you can get creative with the cars going down the street, or you can get creative with our next solar eclipse that we have. We have 2 of them coming through Texas in the next couple of years. Or if you want to do something like the Aurora Borealis, I have a workshop that goes to Norway to photograph this, then you know how to photograph these things because you already have those skills: light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, and you know how they all fit together. So that's what I'm going to try to teach you. Then you can get your crystal ball and photograph the Christmas tree through the crystal ball. Or even if you just want to photograph your pet in front of the Christmas lights. I saw your little dog there, Carrie. So even if you just want to do something as mundane as that, it all boils down to understanding how your light meter works, what it's doing, what an f-stop is, what a shutter speed is, and what an ISO is. And then from there on, you can photograph anything. I will warn you ahead of time, this is very technical. Carrie, I asked you what you did, but Annabelle, I didn't ask you what you did. Do you work?
Yes, I work for State Farm.
So insurance. Okay. Okay. So if you are used to very detailed things like engineering or medicine or accounting or anything where you do a lot of little detail work, you're going to love photography, because photography is just putting together little bitty pieces. And when you get them all lined up, everything fits together and you get a photograph. So if you get frustrated with the technicals of this, just realize that I'm trying to teach you something that is really technical. You bring the creativity to photography, but I'm teaching you the technicals. And so if you get frustrated with yourself, just remind yourself that you're learning something that's really at its essence, very, very technical. So, you know, give yourself a little leeway here. This takes a little bit of time to learn. Some people get it real fast and some people need a little bit longer. So first of all, on your camera, you all both have the screen that folds out. We are not going to use it like this. We're going to use it with the screen wrapped back around and up against the body of the camera. So this camera is just too big for you to use that screen folded out. It's just cumbersome that way. There will be some times when you're maybe holding the camera over a chain link fence to take a photo of something and you want to use that screen and tilt it back down so you can see what your composition is. When you got the camera down on the ground and you want to rotate the screen around so that you can see what your composition is. But most of the time, we're going to put the screen right flat up against the back of the camera. So it just rotates around backwards so that the shiny part is facing out, because we're going to use that for a lot of things. So we do not use the screen folded out most of the time. There are a few times when you'll use it folded out, but most of the time we don't. And then also, very important, that little teeny weeny dial, it's a little round dial that's right up by the edge of the viewfinder. Did both of you all find that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. That's called your diopter. And when you look through the viewfinder and push the button halfway down so that all the lights inside the viewfinder come on, and you rotate that diopter, you can adjust it for your eye prescription. So the view through the viewfinder should be completely clear. The numbers on the bottom, that's what that's for. You just got your light bulb moment, didn't you, Carrie?
I had no idea what that was for, but I kept turning it and I was like, sure, I found it.
Yeah, okay, but what do I do with it? Now, what that means is that if you hand your camera to somebody, they may not be able to see through the viewfinder because you've set it for your eye prescription. Or as your eyes get tired during the day, I wear contact lenses, and so my eyes get tired as the day goes on. So you might need to make minute adjustments, but most of the time, once you have adjusted the diopter, you don't need to adjust it any longer. Just be aware, if you hand your camera to a friend, they might say something like, I can't see through there. And a lot of the young people who are used to looking at cell phone cameras and aren't used to a bigger camera, they will many times think that that viewfinder isn't very clear. And that's just simply because they haven't adjusted the diopter for their eyes. So that's what the diopter is. Okay.
Ooh, yep.
And you just push your button, your shutter button halfway down, turns all the lights on inside the viewfinder, and then you adjust the view through that way. So all the numbers on the bottom of the screen should be nice and clear. Okay, so on the back of your camera, some important things for both of you all. So on the Rebel 1, so Kari, on the back of your camera, you push your info button 3 times and that brings up the display menu on the back of the camera. You've got your Q button right here. And then you've got your Q button that pulls up your display panel, that pulls up your menu on the back and allows you to rotate around. I'm sorry, the Q button allows you to rotate around to the different options around the back of your screen. And once you push your Q button, Carrie, then you can also push these toggles right here. And those toggles allow you to move up and down through the menu panel. And then we're going to come to your focus point in a bit, and it's this one right here. Okay. And then Annabelle, yours looks just a slight bit different, not too much different, but just a slight bit different. You've got the Rebel 7 and your Q button is right here. And then that Q button allows one of these squares or rectangles to light up, and then you can now move around using your side little brackets right here. And then also, Annabelle, you push your display button 3 times and you get the screen that looks like this. And do both of you all have a screen that looks like this on the back?
I do.
You do?
Yeah, it's similar.
Okay. Okay, because you also have the option, if you look up here in this corner, you have an option of what's called the guided menu or the standard menu. And I'd like you all to be in the standard menu. So it's the one that's solid black as opposed to half and half. It's good. Annabelle,
Yeah.
you with me?
Yeah.
Okay, super. Okay, we got it then. Okay, so now what I want you to do is I would like you to look through the viewfinder of your camera. Everybody's on the M mode up on the top, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
and you can pop your flash down for now, Carrie. We don't need that until next time, okay? So everybody's in the M mode up on the top. You've still got autofocus turned on, and that's on your lens. So you still want your autofocus turned on your lens. So your autofocus is turned on your lens, but your camera is in the M mode on the top of the camera. Now look through the viewfinder, please, and push the button halfway down. So look through your viewfinder. Annabelle, put your camera up to your eyes. There you go. And push the button halfway down. Do you all see this little scale that looks like a measuring device? Do y'all see that in the bottom? Okay.
Yes.
Everybody's got that one. Okay. That is called your light meter scale. And that is your camera trying to talk to you. So that's how your camera is communicating with you. And it will always show up in the bottom when you're using the M mode. So put your camera down for right now and let me explain to you what the light meter is doing. This is an under the hood explanation because I think it's always important if you know what's going on behind the scenes, okay? So through inside your camera, you have this device called a light meter. That light meter originally showed up in the digital SLRs back in the 1950s. So I remember, for instance, my father holding a handheld light meter in his hand, and he would hold it out to the scene that he was photographing. He would look at it, and then he would go back to his camera and make adjustments. In the 1950s, the engineers put that handheld light meter inside the camera. So you don't need that external handheld light meter anymore. So what that light meter does is when you point your camera at the scene and you push your shutter button halfway down, the camera is now looking at the light that you are seeing. So in this scene that I'm showing you, it's looking at the sun, it's looking at the shrimp boat, it's looking at the sky, it's looking at the water, and it's looking at the light in the entire scene. So it's called a light meter. So it's looking at the light in the entire scene. That light meter is then in turn activating that little scale I just showed you in the bottom of the viewfinder. And that little scale is trying to say, if you move me right back to the middle, so if I'm off right now and you move me to the middle, I will give you a perfectly exposed image. So that's what we call balancing the light meter. So if you balance the light meter, then you get a perfectly exposed image. So your camera is talking to you through that light meter. It's trying to say, make a change. I need you to adjust me so that I can take a better picture for you. But the light meter has evolved since the 1950s, and you now have 3 and possibly 4 light meters inside your camera, and they read the light in a totally different way. So let me explain to you the different types of light meters you might have. And then on the handout, you'll see that I've given you the 3 most common light meters. And then we'll look at your camera and we'll see which ones you actually have. So the first light meter that was developed by the engineers back in the 1950s was called a center weighted light meter. You still have a center weighted light meter inside of your camera. And what the center weighted light meter does is it reads all the light in the entire frame, like that picture that I'm showing you. It reads the sun where it's bright, it reads the shadows where it's really dark or dark, it reads the real dark down in the bottom corner where it's real dark, and then it just averages it all together. But averaging isn't always good. So what happens if you mix white paint with black paint?
Okay, great.
You get gray, exactly. And that's what averaging does. So the center weighted light meter is the oldest one we have. It is the most primitive that we have. And as a result, we don't use this one very often. So you can just put a line through the center weighted light meter. And as one of your options, this is one that we are not going to use. And then in the 1980s, engineers created a new type of light meter, and it only reads that center spot right there. Ignores the sun, ignores the shade down in the real corner, in the dark in the corner, and it only reads that area right there in that center. And this is called partial for us Canon users, and it's called spot for Nikon users. Nikon got to the patent office first. They got to call it spot. Everybody else had to call it partial. And now it doesn't matter. Everybody else calls it spot except Canon. Canon still calls it partial. So it only reads that spot right there. And it ignores all the other light in the scene. When it came out, this was pretty revolutionary for average photographers, because I could now put that spot on a performer in a spotlight against a black stage, and then balance my light meter based on that. And now my picture of the performer in the spotlight would come out perfectly exposed for the performer in the spotlight. Where with center weighted, because it was taking into account all the dark area behind the performer would come out overexposed in the background because the background factored too much into the equation. For me as a nature photographer, because I'm a nature photographer, I could now photograph with the spot meter or partial meter, a hawk on a branch against the beautiful blue sky. Because anything against beautiful blue sky, because the sky is so bright, is going to come out as a silhouette. So it used to be in the old days with center weighted light meter that if I pointed my camera at a hawk against a beautiful blue sky, I would end up getting a picture of a silhouette of a hawk. But put that center point now on that hawk, balance the light meter, and now I could get the exposure for the hawk and not the sky. So today we only use the spot meter or partial meter if we have a very, very contrasty subject. So once again, a performer in a spotlight that I want, that they don't, no stage lights, just the performer in the spotlight. Then we might push the button, rotate the dial, and go into partial light meter. Or if I have a subject that's up against a very, very black background, or even a very, very white background, I might push my button, rotate the dial, go into spot meter, and only take my reading off of the center of the camera or the center of the picture. It's not going to happen very often. We don't do that much. And so that's why I say, and you can write it on your handout, your spot meter or your partial meter, we might only use that 1% of the time. It's just kind of a nice gadget for us to have. And why we don't use it as much as we once did is because since autofocus cameras, engineers have been working on new types of light meters. So the latest types of light meters that we have read this section of the frame and average everything in that section, this section 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 and average everything there. And then they take all of that and run it through new algorithms to give us a better exposure. So your evaluative meter is what Canon calls it. Nikon calls it a matrix meter. So your light meter is called an evaluative light meter. And this is the one that we are going to use 99% of the time. That's where I've got you all set right now. And let me show you an example of why it is so important that we use this. So in this photograph that you see right here, I used the evaluative light meter. It's reading all the segments in the frame, averaging them all together. And by the way, some of the high-end cameras that Canon and Nikon are making now aren't just reading 5 segments, they're reading 64 different segments. And some of the more expensive cameras, they know that this is a really bright area where the sun is, and they know that this is a really dark area where the shadows are. And so some of the more expensive cameras have an even smarter light meter out there. So it's pretty amazing what we can do now. So in this photograph that I took of the shrimp boat silhouetted against the setting sun, I set my camera on my evaluative light meter, and I did one other thing, and I'll show you what that is a little later, but I'm not going to tell you now because it doesn't make any sense to you, but I'll show you later on. So that's how I got this photograph of the silhouette of the shrimp boat. But had I used my spot meter, point my camera at the scene, dial in my f-stop, dial in my shutter speed, put the little scale right in the middle. If I had used my partial light meter, the one that Canon calls partial, and only took my reading off of this center section of the frame, this is what I would have gotten, because this is what the camera saw in that center section of the frame, and it's properly exposing what I told it to do. So the difference between the two photographs is the one over on the left, I used my evaluative light meter, and the one over on the right, I used my partial light meter. And you see the sun's gone down, see that? Between the two photographs. And that's just because I've gone here to photograph a really cool sunset and it's not happening, and I'm just trying to make something happen out of do whatever, because it's not working. So you see what a difference I get just by changing which type of light meter I use. So for you all, you're going to leave your camera set on your evaluative light meter 99% of the time. But if you ever find yourself in a situation like with this barn owl, where your subject is primarily pretty bright and it's up against a really, really dark background, a lot of contrast, then you might think about pushing your button and rotating your dial and changing to the partial light meter. So look on the back of your camera and let me show you where your light meter is, or light meter button. Look on the back of your camera. So if
This
you
is
look
the
on
one
your
I
back of
couldn't
your
find.
camera, and then pull up your display panel. So you should just right now, just push your shutter button halfway down to wake it back up. Your camera goes to sleep, by the way. And so now you're just going to wake it back up. And if you look on your back display panel, one of those icons, I think it's on the third row, it has a rectangle with a parentheses and a dot in the middle of it. You see that one? Or it looks like an eye, a rectangle, it looks like an eye.
Okay,
You see that one, Carrie?
maybe. Think so.
Okay, Annabelle, you see it?
I think so.
Okay. And
Looks like
can
an
you,
eye.
pardon?
You said it
Looks
looks
like
like
an
an eye.
Exactly.
Okay.
Looks like an eye. Exactly. Okay. That's your light meter icon. And so in the event that you ever wanted to change it, you're simply going to push your Q button to activate your display panel on the back. And then you're going to toggle over to that one, push in your set button. It'll give you your 3 options. And then you toggle down to the option you want and then push your set button again. Okay.
Okay.
But for right now, we're going to leave it where it is on your evaluative light meter.
Got it.
Okay, now how do you put that scale in the middle? So to put that scale in the middle, we're going to have to use our f-stop, and then we're going to have to use our shutter speed. So we've got 2 dials that we're going to have to use. Each one of them has a reason for selecting. And that's how we're going to work either one of those 2 dials or both of those dials in tandem with each other to make the scale go right in the middle. Okay, so let's talk about f-stops. Look at the photograph of the malachite butterfly that I've got on the screen. And you notice that the malachite butterfly, if you look very closely at this now, the malachite butterfly is in focus. Part of the leaf is in focus, and part of one of the pink flowers is in focus. You see that? And if you realize this also, it is a parallel plane that is in focus. So this is what is called your depth of field. It's your area in focus that you have. Excuse me, I'm going to have to cough. So why this is so important to us as a photographer is that with photography, our viewer looks at everything that is in focus, and our viewer ignores everything that is out of focus. So if we want to draw the viewer's eye to a certain part of the photograph, we want to make sure that that part of the photograph is in focus. The human brain looks at what is in focus and it ignores what is out of focus. So anything in your photograph that is in sharp focus, your viewer is going to look at it and study it. Anything that is out of focus, your viewer is just going to kind of take it into context. So if you look at the background, you see how all that tan stuff back there, you see how that's all blurry?
Yes.
And that's by design. I don't show it to you. I don't want to show it to you. What do you think that stuff is? What do you think that tan stuff is?
That's fine.
What now, Carrie?
Like the side of your house?
A house? What do you think, Annabelle?
The sky.
Sky? Okay, it's the gravel in the parking lot.
Ah, not textured at all. Cool.
And see, I don't want you to see the gravel in the parking lot, because if you see the gravel in the parking lot, then you're going, and you've recently been shopping for gravel at Lowe's or Home Depot, you're going to say, that's the type gravel I was looking for. And then your brain is no longer paying attention to my photograph anymore. You are back shopping for gravel. So anything that I show the viewer that will distract them is going to draw them away from my photograph. So f-stop allows us to either put our subject in or put parts of the photograph in focus or put it out of focus. So let me explain to you how this works. So I want you to take one of the pieces of paper you have on your desk, turn it over onto the back side where it's blank. And I would like you to draw this chart because we're going to use it for the next hour or so. You're going to make a horizontal line down on the bottom, but give yourself room to write because you need to take all kinds of notes down here underneath the numbers. So on this horizontal line underneath that, you're going to write the numbers 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. And then over here on the left, I'd like you to make a vertical line and draw that going up. And once again, give yourself some room over here so you can write. And down at the bottom, I want you to write 500 and then 250 and then 125 and 60 and 30 and 15 and 8 and 4 and 2. And then with quotation marks, you'll notice that I've got 0.3 with quotation marks. I'm sorry, we didn't get a 2 on this one. And then 2 with quotation marks, and then the word bulb. Got it? Okay. So the 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32 are called f-stops. F/stop. F, the function symbol in math, / the division symbol. It's a mathematical formula, but we never, ever, ever have to know the mathematical formula. Okay. I recently taught it to some advanced photographers for a really geeky talk. And it was the first time any of them had ever done the formula before, but it is a math formula. But the f-stop, 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. These are the numbers you and I talk about. Kathy, which f-stop should I use? Let's start with a 5.6. Annabelle, what f-stop did you use for that picture? I used an f16. Should I have used an f22? Well, it's hard to say. So this is the number that we talk about. This is the number you see through your camera. When you download your photographs onto your computer and open them in one of the Adobe products, you are going to see that you used an f3.5 or you used an f4.5 on that. So this is what we talk about. This is the words, these are the numbers that you and I communicate with. What's happening though, behind the scenes, is this thing called an aperture. And this is in your lens of your camera. So each one of you's got a lens on your camera right now. Your camera came with a lens. And inside that aperture, there are a series of metal sheets that overlay each other, and they form a circle that gets smaller and gets bigger. So this aperture at 2.8 is very, very large. So draw yourself a real big circle. So your aperture at 2.8 is really, really large, and it's letting through a lot of light. And when you rotate your dial and go to 3.5, your aperture opening gets a bit smaller. And when you go to 4.5, it gets a bit smaller. And when you go to 5.6, it gets a bit smaller. And when you go to 6.8, it gets smaller. And when you go to 8, guess what? It gets smaller. And then you go to 11 and it gets smaller, and 16, it gets smaller, and 22, it gets smaller. And lo and behold, by the time you get to 32, it's just a pinprick of light. So that opening in your lens is called an aperture. So if you were ever writing about the amount of light coming through, you would say that you changed your aperture. For right now, I don't care whether you use f-stop or aperture. It's okay with me, whichever word you use. But what physically happens, the physics of light, what physically happens is that when light flows through your lens and goes through your convex glass lenses and concave glass lenses that are all nestled precisely together, we get this thing called depth of field, D-E-P-T-H of field. That's the area that's in focus. So if you dial in a 2.8 on your lens, there is a whole bunch of light coming through your aperture, but there is very little area in focus. So under 2.8, make yourself a line that's maybe a 1/16 of an inch, because there's very tiny depth of field. There's very tiny anything that's in focus at 2.8. But when you go to 3.5, give yourself maybe 2/16 of an inch. So when you go to 3.5, the physics of light going through all those glass lenses and then going through that aperture, you get a little bit more area in focus. And at 4.5, give yourself just a little bit more of that line. At 4.5, you've got more area in focus. And at 5.6, you've got more area in focus. And at 6.8, you've got more area in focus. And at f8, give yourself a nice little fat line under f8, because there's an old saying in photography, f8 and be there, because if you put your camera on f8, most stuff's in focus. So program mode, P mode, which you will never use after taking a class with me, the program mode, it puts you at f8. Most stuff's in focus. It's not going to be creative. It's not going to be real pretty, but most stuff's in focus. Your cell phone camera, f8, most stuff's in focus. Okay, doesn't have a blurry background unless we do something artistic. So f8 is just kind of a nice, big, fat depth of field. And then as we go to f11, we get more area in focus, and f16, we get more area in focus, and f22, we get more area in focus. And by the time we get to f32, put yourself an infinity symbol at f32. Because if we dial in f32 on our f-stop dial, the area from the front that we can see through the front of the lens all the way to the mountains in the distance is in focus. So your f-stop controls how much light comes through the aperture in the lens, but it also, more importantly, controls how much depth of field we have or how much depth of field we don't have. Now notice something that's a little confusing about this. 2.8 is a small number, only two things, but it's a big opening. But we only have a little bit in focus. So they don't line up exactly right. But if you can remember it this way, at 2.8, two things are in focus. And at 32, 32 things are in focus. Then maybe that'll help you out. The bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay, good. So your f-stops control some stuff going on behind the scenes that we can't see. You just have to kind of know this in your head, that if I use a 3.5, very little is going to be in focus. If I use an f8, lots of stuff, most stuff's going to be in focus. If I use a 32, lots of stuff's going to be in focus. So it's not a precise science right now for you. I just want you to know that the bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Questions on that so far?
Not yet, but I'm sure they'll come.
Okay. Okay, so put your camera in your hands. And with your thumb, you are going to push and hold that plus minus button that's in the center of the back of your camera. You see that plus minus button in the center of the back of your camera? It says AV plus minus on it. You see that? Got it?
No,
Not doing anything though.
Okay. Push and hold it with your thumb. Annabella, it's right at the left, excuse me, it's right at the right corner. Yeah, look where Carrie's pointing to it on her camera.
I don't know if that helps.
Does that help? And yours is, Annabelle, yours is kind of
Yes.
at the top of your screen on the right hand top corner. You see that AV plus minus button? Yes?
yes.
Okay, good. Push it with your thumb, hold it with your thumb, and then rotate your front dial. So if you push and rotate that dial at the same time, you will notice that your f-stops are changing. Got it? Did you see it change, Carrie? Push and hold, you're in the M mode, right?
Yep.
Okay, and push your shutter button halfway down just so you can wake the camera up. And then push and hold that plus minus button and rotate the dial, and you'll see your f-stop change through the viewfinder, and you'll also see it change.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah,
I
see it change? Good, good, good. Annabelle's it changing?
No, which dial do I move once I press it
Your
down?
front dial, your finger dial. So you're holding the plus minus with your right thumb, and you're rotating the front dial with your right finger.
Yeah,
Okay, and you're there you go. Your internet's lagging. Is it moving now, Annabelle?
yes.
Okay, super. What's the smallest number you can get? Each one of you. What's the smallest number you can get?
3.5.
3.5. Good. Annabella, what's your smallest number? 4.5?
4.0.
4.0. Good. Now
4.0.
rotate the dial the other direction, and what's the biggest number you can get?
22.
22. Good. Annabella, what's the biggest number you can get?
It's only going to 5.0.
5.0. Rotate the dial the other direction. What's the biggest number you can get? And Annabella, your
Now it
screen,
goes 5.6.
5.6. It should go all the way. You should be able to rotate that dial and get it all the way up to 22. You're just pushing and holding the button with your thumb, and then you're rotating the dial. And if nothing's happened, then push your shutter button halfway down just to wake the camera back up, because it'll go to sleep pretty fast. How big of a number could you get, Annabelle?
22.
22. Good. Now zoom your lens and do exactly the same thing. Zoom your lens. That's the front dial on your, or the middle dial. It's the big dial on your lens. Zoom your lens so you get a little bit more telephoto. And now what's the biggest number you can get? What's the biggest number you can get? Carrie, what's the biggest number you can get?
Oh, wait, my camera, I like lost I'm not seeing anything through my screen. So I was trying to wake it up, put it back to normal.
Yeah, it'll go to sleep, but it shouldn't have gone to sleep while you were holding it like that.
No, but I can't get anything in my viewfinder.
Are you seeing things on the back display panel?
I am, yes.
Let me see. Put that up to the camera. Okay, you are on live view. So push your display button so you go back to your menu. Push it again. There you go. You're back on your menu. I mean, not your menu, but your display.
There we go. Now
Okay,
it opens.
that's what it
Thank
was.
you.
Okay, yes, yes. Okay, so now when you look through the viewfinder, what's the biggest number you can get when you zoomed your lens out?
Oh, 36.
36 now. How about you, Annabella?
Been able to do it.
All you did, the only thing we did was just zoom the lens. That's the only thing we did. And then zoom your lens back, Carrie, and you'll see that you can only go to 22, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. 22. Cool.
Okay. So Annabella, what's it doing?
Mine is not moving.
What's
I think
not
I moved
moving?
something else. When I move the lens,
Uh-huh. And let me see your display panel on the back, Annabella, please. Point it toward the camera. You're freezing up. I think you're in the, you're frozen. Okay, okay. Let me explain to you why
yeah.
this changes. Is that you all both have what's called a variable f-stop lens. And a variable f-stop lens is lighter and less expensive than a non-variable f-stop lens. So when you zoom in, you can get a smaller number, but when you zoom out, you can't get that smaller number anymore. You've got a new smaller number. So Carrie, when you zoomed all the way back in to your widest angle, then you got an f22 at the far end, but you got a 36 at the, or 32 at the other end, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Annabelle, did you get it to work?
Still trying.
Okay, keep working, okay? I don't want you to give up. Put your camera back, just push and hold that plus minus button, rotate your front dial. And don't even look through the viewfinder right now, just push and hold your plus minus button. And also I see on the back of your screen, Annabella, it looks like you've got your menus pulled up as opposed to your display panel pulled up. Yeah, there you go. That's what I want you to have. You're good. You're doing just fine. Now push and hold that plus minus button with your thumb. And you'll notice that the rectangle that has the f-stop in it lights up. You see that? And then rotate, push and hold your plus minus button. And that rectangle with your f-stop should light up. And now rotate your front dial. Correct? Is your f-stop changing?
No.
So you're pushing and holding your plus minus button. You sure?
Yes.
With your thumb. And then at the same time, you're rotating your front dial.
It
now
takes
look,
a bit of coordination.
it takes a bit of coordination, it does. Now look through your viewfinder, Annabella, and tell me whether or not your f-stop is changing. Look through your viewfinder, put the camera up to your face and look through your viewfinder. And push and hold. Don't do anything with your other hand. Don't do any zooming right now. All I want you to do is rotate that dial on the front of the camera. See with your pointing finger, see where the dial is on the front of the camera? Yeah.
Okay, this one?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, now it's changing.
Yeah, that's the dial you need to be moving. Yes. That's called your
Okay.
command dial.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
So
now
the
what?
highest goes to
So what's the
36,
highest
the
what's the highest
Thirty-
f-stop you can get?
36.
Super. Now use your other hand and zoom the lens. Do the exact same thing, and you should only be able to go to 22 now. Got it?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, super. Okay.
Yes.
So those are your f-stops. And yes, it does take a little bit of coordination, but after a while, you'll figure it out. You'll get it. So that's just part of what you're doing. So your f-stops control how much of the scene we let our viewer see and how much of the scene we let our viewer not see. So for instance, in this photograph of the statue in Italy, I designed my photograph so that the viewer looks at the face of the statue, but I don't want the wall of the house to interfere with the composition or with the design of the photograph. So in this case, I focused on the face of the statue and I used an f5.6. 5.6, by the way, is one of my favorite f-stops. It's just kind of just narrow enough, but just wide enough. So 5.6 is one of my favorites. But if I wanted to get the finger of the statue plus the face of the statue in focus. So let's say maybe there was a butterfly on the finger of the statue, and I want the finger of the statue with the butterfly plus the face of the statue to be in focus. Now I might have to go to an f8, but if I went to an f8, that's more depth of field. So now my background might come more in focus. So in that instance, my background wouldn't be soft and pretty anymore. My background would be more visible to the viewer of the photograph. So you as a photographer have to decide what kind of f-stop I'm going to use to give this photograph the look that I want it to have. So in this photograph of the little girl, she's 2 years old. So I'll give you a hint, she's 2 years old. So if you look closely, you will notice that her lobes of her ears are out of focus. You see that? So we've got on a 2-year-old kid, we've got about that much in focus. So what f-stop do you think that I used? It's not precise.
3.5? I don't know how you decide.
Yeah, 3.5. It's not precise. So yeah, it's about a 3.5 or a 4.0. And to get my photograph, the little girl was looking up at some friends of mine. And so I got down low, moved over just a little bit so that the background wasn't as close to her, because the further the background is from your subject, the more you can blow it out of focus. So you'll see photographers many times jostling around for different angles. And what we're looking for is we're trying to get that background as far away from our subject as we possibly can. So in this case, I've got the background 8-10 feet away from her, and then it doesn't interfere. What's back there? What's behind her?
Like she's in a garden, like on someone's patio, like there's planter pots.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But if I let you see those, and once again, you'd been looking for planters recently, or you'd been, working on your garden recently, you would get totally distracted because those are the exact color of pots you wanted, or you never thought to put that rust color with that blue color. Anything I can give the viewer to let them get distracted with, that's when my photo fails. And so with this one, I'm using about a 3.5 or a 4, so that I'm just giving enough depth of field to get her little face in focus. Here's another little girl on a swing in a garden. I don't need to show the viewer the garden swing because the photo's not about the garden swing. 20 years from now, the photo is about the little girl. It's not about where she was or what the garden was or what the swing looked like. It's all about her. And so this, once again, is about a 4.5 or a 5.6. So we're trying to make that background as nondescript as possible. And The further away our background is from our subject, the more we can blow it out of focus. So we as photographers are choosing where we position our subject when we photograph them so that we can blow that background out of focus. So your f4 would look like this, but your f22 would look like this. So your f4 would look like this, and your f22, whoops, catch up with me, computer. Whoops, there we go. No, let me go back. It 22 would look like this. And so you have to decide what you want your photograph to look like. Crystal ball again, and I have a class coming up in crystal ball photography if you're interested in how to use a crystal ball to photograph. This is an f4. And then the same photograph, catch up with me, computer. Now my computer is lagging. That's an f22. Mm-hmm. And so your f4 and your f22, each one of them determines how you want your photo to end up looking. So your 4, the edges of the crystal ball are soft, the background is soft, the viewer can kind of figure it out, but the f22, I'm showing it to you in more detail. So your f-stops control how much I let you see in the photograph and how much I let you not see in the photograph. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
For now.
For now. Okay, good.
Until I
Good,
start
good,
doing
good.
it.
Good. Now, sometimes you might have a lens that's got a 1.4 or a 2.8 on it. Neither one of you all do. You all have your 3.5, the 3.5s to 5.6. Sometimes though, you might be tempted to buy a lens that's got a 1.4 or a 2.0 on it. And I want to warn you that that is very narrow. So this is my socks cat. You all just get to see a lot of pictures of him because he's the only one in the office a lot of times. So it's not like he likes to have his picture taken. He just is photogenic, you know. So sometimes when I need to demonstrate a point, he's the only object that I have. But if you look closely at this photograph, you'll see that the tip of his nose, the width of his nose, which if you have a cat, you know, that's not too wide. And then the flat plane going to that one eye is what's in focus. So that means that that depth of field is only about that much. So not very much whatsoever. And it took me nearly 50 pictures of me moving and him moving to get one where the depth of field did what I wanted it to do. So you might be tempted sometimes by looking at pictures on Instagram or Pinterest to buy a lens that's got a 1.0, 1.4 or a 2.0 f-stop on it. But the reality is we don't use it there because it's just such narrow depth of field. So the chances of us getting it exactly right many times is just nearly impossible. So a lens might come with this. It doesn't mean that we use it with this. It means that what it's designed for is to give a beautiful, pure background. Notice how that background is just like smooth as can be back there. And that's simply by the design of the lens. So that's what the lens is designed for. We'll talk more about lenses in another class, okay? So in this photograph where I'm showing you the entire river, okay, down in Costa Rica, what do you think my depth of field is? What do you think my f-stop is?
Pretty broad. It's everything. 32?
What'd you say, Annabella?
22.
22, you got it. Absolutely right. So this one would be my 22 or my 32. And the lens that I've got, I'm going to use a 32 on it. And so when we see a scene and we designed it and pre-composed it in our brains, we know, and the first time that I saw this river, I knew that I was going to take my tripod down to the edge. I was going to put my camera on f32 and I was going to show the viewer all the way up the river, okay? But now that I've selected my f32, I've got to put that light meter scale right in the middle. Now, look through your viewfinder right now. Just look through your viewfinder. Push your shutter button halfway down. Do you see that your light meter scale is not right in the middle? Do you see that it's off to one side or the other? Yes?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. There's be some little bitty marks on either the left or the right of the triangle that's right in the middle, correct? Look through your
Oh, yes.
viewfinder.
Yeah, my triangle right in the middle.
Triangle right in the middle, yeah. So you see how that light meter scale isn't right in the middle, Annabelle,
Yeah,
correct?
yes.
Okay, good. Because now we got to learn how to put that scale right in the middle. So you know your f-stop, but now we need to go back to your chart for just a moment. And I want to teach you about the other number, and the other number is called your shutter speed. So look back at the chart that we just made just a little bit ago. The other number that's going to help you get that scale right in the middle is called your shutter speed. And shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement. So shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement. Notice in that river picture that I showed you, you see how that water is all blurry and silky? You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't look like that way in
Yeah.
real life. So this is the first of our photography optical illusions that I'm showing you. So shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement, depending on where you set your shutter speed. So looking at this chart, you will see that I've got shutter speeds over on the left, and then I've got your f-stops down at the bottom. So your shutter speeds control movement. And if you look at your handout, I've given you 5 shutter speeds that we're going to use as kind of benchmarks. Now put your camera back in your hands. And you know where you were pushing and holding your plus minus button with your thumb before? I don't want you to do that now. I just want you to push your shutter button halfway down to wake your camera up, and now take your forefinger and rotate that front dial. And when you rotate that front dial with your forefinger, that changes your shutter speed. So look through your viewfinder, Annabella, so that you can see it happening. When you rotate that front dial with your forefinger, it changes your shutter speed. And Carrie, how fast of a shutter speed can you get? What's the biggest number you can get with your shutter speed dial?
If I'm doing this correctly, oh, the biggest, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh boy, 4,000?
4,000, exactly.
Am I looking at the right number?
You're
Is
looking
that
at the
really-
right number, exactly. Annabella, can you see that when you rotate your shutter speed
Yeah.
dial? Can you go to 4,000 too?
Yeah, I'm at,
You're at
Yes.
4,000. Good. Now 4,000 is fast. 4,000th of a shutter speed is fast. So we're going to stop some action at 4,000th of a shutter speed. But now I want you to rotate that dial again and go the opposite direction. And what's the first number you come to that has quotation marks next to it? Rotate that dial again, and what's the first number you come to that has quotation marks?
It says 0.3. It's
Zero.
0.3.
Yeah, 0 quotation marks 3. Yeah. Annabella? Same
Yeah.
thing? Yeah. Okay, good.
Yes.
Good. This is when we are, and if you rotate just kind of back a little bit, you'll see that you have a literal 3, and then you have a 0 quotation mark 3. You notice that?
I have a 4.
You have a 4, and then you
Yeah.
have a 0.3 with the quotation mark, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that 4 is a 1/4 of a second. But
Oh,
then that 0 quotation mark 3 is a 1/3 of a second. So we've moved into decimal points.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. And then after that, you'll get, do you get a 2 with quotation marks next to it?
I then get after the like 0.3,
Uh-huh.
I get a 0.4,
Yeah.
0.5,
Yeah.
and like I can keep going until like it goes to like,
Don't keep going yet.
okay, it keeps
Yeah,
going.
okay. Okay. But what's your first whole number with quotation marks next to it?
A 1.
A 1. Good. You see that, Annabella? The 1?
Yes.
Okay. We're now into seconds. So where we can go to 4,000th of a second, which is very, very fast, we can now go into 1 second, and which is really pretty slow. And you've never really know how long a second is until you've been sitting there waiting for your camera to go off. Then you realize how long a second really is. Now take that dial and go all the way down and you get to 30 with quotation marks, right? So 30 with quotation marks is 30 seconds. And once again, don't click your shutter right now, but you never really realized how long 30 seconds is until you have to stand there in the dark waiting for it to finish. It's a long time, okay? So we can go everywhere from 4,000 to 30 seconds with our shutter speeds on these cameras. So, and this is shutter, by the way, is in your camera. So the shutter, when you bought the camera, it came with a set number of shutter speeds in it. When you buy a lens, it has your f-stops. So your shutter is in your camera, your lens has your f-stops in it. But that camera that you own, those are the shutter speeds it has. So you can use everywhere from 30 seconds all the way to 4,000th of a second. And then you've got, if you continue going, this thing called bulb, B-U-L-B. And that is as long as you hold the shutter button down, the shutter will stay open. So there are some very creative things that we can do with some really long shutter speeds. Come back for some other classes later on and I'll teach you how to use those, okay? So now you know where your shutter speeds are and you know where your f-stops are, correct? Yay. Okay, and we're an hour into class and now you know where your shutter speeds and your f-stops are. Now let me show you how to balance your light meter. So in that photograph, looking down that river in Costa Rica, you and I have already determined that we needed an f32, right? So we want to show maximum amount of depth of field. So I'm going to dial in an f32 on my camera. Push that button, rotate that dial, get myself a 32. Now I'm going to put the camera on a tripod because that f32 means I just have a teeny weeny opening through the aperture. So I'm going to put my camera on the tripod and I'm going to compose up my scene. And now it's time for me to balance my light meter. And I'm going to show you all how to do this after I show you how, okay? So I'm going to rotate my front dial until the light meter scale goes right in the middle. And wait a minute, because I'll show you how to do this. And when that when that scale goes right in the middle, there's no little marks on either side of the little triangle on the bottom. I get an 1/8 of a second shutter speed and an f32. So now it's time for brain to kick in and say, well, what's going to happen if I have an 1/8 of a second and an f32? Well, Kathy's already told you what happens if you have an f32. You see all your depth of field, right? But an 1/8 of a second, look at your handout. And at an 1/8 of a second, water blurs. Water always blurs. All water blurs at an 1/8 of a second. So anytime I want to blur water in a photograph, I have to have an 1/8 of a second shutter speed or slower. And what happens, guys, is once you learn how to blur water, then you just blur water all the time. Because once a photographer learns how to blur water, that's it. All water gets blurred. Because only people who know how to do it can blur water. Okay. So once you learn how to do it, then from now on, the Atlantic Ocean is blurred, the Pacific Ocean is blurred, all rivers are blurred because we all know how to blur water, as long as the camera's on a tripod. Okay. So that river because of all of its rapids, I knew that I wanted it to blur out because it looks really pretty. So my f32 and my 1/8 of a second for that moment in time, that day with that sunlight, I got a f32 and an 1/8 of a second to balance my light meter. But one of you all had, Carrie, you had an f22, right? Okay, so let's say Carrie's standing next to me and she says, well, wait a second, I only have an f32 or f22. I don't have an f32 on my lens. So what would happen is, because your aperture opening was a little bit bigger, you would only be able to get to a 15th of a second. And you'd say, but wait a second, it's a 15th of a second. So I'm not going to blur water because I have to have an 1/8 of a second to blur water. And I'd say, right. And you can't just throw a hissy fit because you can't get to your 1/8 of a second, like the photo you want. But what would happen as the sun goes down and it gets a tiny bit darker, Carrie would be able to then get f22 at an 1/8 of a second. But then my reading would be f32 at a 1/4 of a second. So those two numbers are the same amount of light coming through. They just yield different optical results.
Ooh, okay.
Okay, yeah. Sort of makes sense. Sort of holding on to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if I went to f16, I could also balance my light meter at a 30th of a second. And if I went to f11, whoops, I could balance my light meter at a 60th of a second. And if I went to f8, I could balance my light meter at 1/25th of a second. And if I went to 6.8, I could balance at 2/50th of a second. And if I went to 5.6, I could balance at 500th of a second. So there are a huge possibilities of where you can balance your light meter. But notice that they graph to a straight line.
So with the flying parrot that you showed us earlier, and just looking at the notes that you gave us, so at a 500th of a second of shutter speed, that's when you can stop running and flying. So I assume that's what you were using.
Correct.
So to assume balance in normal lighting, that means you were using an f-stop of 5.6 at least.
If we were at the same light that we started with in the river, yes.
Right. Yeah.
See, that's our starting point.
Assuming the parrot's at the river,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we're going to capture them.
Correct.
That was the starting point. So that's a lot of patience in order to get the parrot in that focus frame, like that. Yeah, that just kind of blows my mind a little bit more just looking at the parrot, where I was like, what do you mean the focus was this much? You had them in it.
Yeah.
And stopped them flying right there.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
cool.
But you see that assuming we have the same light, I've got to give up all my depth of field to be able to get my faster shutter speed. Now realize that each one of these, the 5.6 and 500, is exactly the same amount of light as the 6.8 and 250. And it's exactly the same amount of light as the f8 and the 125. So we can balance our light meter in a lot of different places. But whether those two numbers are going to give us what we want in the photograph, only your brain can figure that out. So Carrie, you're absolutely right. If we know that the parrots are going to start flying through, then I've got to go into a faster shutter speed, still balance my light meter, but that means I'm going to have to go way down the scale to keep the light meter balanced. And that's half the fun of this photography thing, because sometimes we got to react very fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you see how I have a lot of different options for balancing the light meter. Hence, if we were on the program mode, which just chooses one of these combinations because it doesn't know that we're photographing a parrot or a river, it chooses just any combination. Our brain is the only one that knows whether that combination is right or not. And that's why I need you all to understand how your camera works. So we're going to, in the beginning, move very, very slowly and making all these changes, but that's because you're consciously thinking about what numbers we need to use. So in the example that I showed you before, let's say that my audience isn't photographers for this river photo. My audience are trout fishermen, fisher women, whatever they're called, anglers. Okay.
Fisher people.
Fisher people.
Yeah.
Anglers do not care about blurry water. They want to see turbulence. They want to see pockets where the fish live. This is a very famous trout river down in Costa Rica, and lots of trout anglers come down here to fish. But to entice them to come to this river, they want to see rapids. They want to see pockets of rushing water. So that's what interests them. So using that chart again, I would use a faster shutter speed and sacrifice my depth of field, versus for photographers, I would use the slower shutter speed and maximize my depth of field. So it all depends on who my audience is, what I'm trying to convey, what I'm trying to communicate. Now, look at the screen for just a moment, because this is F22 or 32. We're going to use F32 on this one. So this is F32, and look way, way, way back up in the river, and you see how you can see all the detail back up in the river, way up there. And then the previous photo that I showed you is about an F8 or an F5.6. And you look back up way up in that river, and you still see that we can see all that detail back there. And look at the blurry, the moss-covered branch way down here in the lower right-hand corner. You see how it's clear in the F8 photo, but it's also clear in the F32 photo. You see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. That's because I'm using a lens that's known for having very fat f-stops by its design. So every lens has a design, and it's used for a general purpose. The lenses that you all bought, that you all have right now on your camera, these are kind of like general purpose lenses. But for landscape photography, we'll talk about this a bit more next time. For landscape photography, we use these really wide angle lenses that let us change our f-stop, and you don't notice it as much. So they're tools. Photography tools, just like anybody else has a tool. So just like a plumber or a home handyman uses a wrench or a hammer or a screwdriver for a certain purpose, in photography, we have lenses that we use for certain purposes, and they're designed for special things. The theory of f-stop and depth of field always holds true. Just how big those f-stops are or how narrow those f-stops are is up to the design of the lens. So I never want you to think that I'm fooling you or trying to fake something out on you. Okay, so looking at this picture of Venice, someday we'll be able to travel again. Yeah, we'll be able to go places. So looking at this picture of Venice, what f-stop do you think I'm using? What do you think?
The 250
f-stop.
Oh, f-stop.
F-stop. Annabella, what'd you say?
5.6.
5.6. I can see everything all the way down the canal.
Oh, 32.
32. You got it. So when you look at a photograph now, you can say, okay, I can see all the way down the canal. So that means, they're using a 32 or a 22. You can look at that now. Now look at the water and you see how the water is blurred. So what shutter speed roughly am I using? 1/8, exactly. So I'm using about 1/8 of a second shutter speed because my water's blurred. Now notice the people that are walking, you see how some of them are just smudges. And then some of them are a little more solid. And you notice the guy with the white bag back here in front of the window, you see how he's kind of solid.
Yeah.
So the longer people stayed still, the more solid they were. The faster they were walking, the more they disappeared. So 1/8 of a second will also make people smudge.
Okay.
If you want people to stay still, if you want people to be solid, then you would have to use a faster shutter speed and sacrifice your depth of field. And you notice that the guy with the bag is still there. You see that, the guy with the white bag? So in the previous photograph, where the water blurs, the gondolas also blur. So if you don't use a fast enough shutter speed, because your gondolas are just sailing along at a nice, even clip, if you don't use a fast enough shutter speed, your gondolas disappear. You see?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the gondolas were there in the first photograph, but we don't see them because I didn't use a fast enough shutter speed to see them. And what's happened is I'm walking home one evening through Venice. I set my tripod up, take an f/32 photograph, look on the back of the camera and realize, oh my gosh, my gondolas disappeared. So change everything real fast so I can show you all that gondolas really can appear. So if your shutter speed's not fast enough, you're going to blur movement. But how fast it needs to be, because you have so many shutter speeds, I've given you 5 as benchmarks, and we'll work with those for the rest of the class. So my first one as a benchmark on shutter speeds is 1/8 of a second, water blurs, okay? But if you have just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of movement in your photograph, just a tiny bit of movement, then you're going to need about a 1/15 of a second shutter speed to stop that movement. So I look through the viewfinder, I see this beautiful redbud tree. I want to blow the background out so that it's nice and soft, but I'm foiled by taking my picture because the branch is just moving in the breeze. So the most important number now is not my f-stop. The most important number is my shutter speed. So if you have movement in your photograph, the first number you dial in, you might want it to be your shutter speed, because you're going to have to determine how much movement I can stop using that shutter speed. So in this case, I dial in a 1/15 of a second first, and then I follow with whatever f-stop puts my light meter scale right in the middle. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, now I want you to dial a 5.6 into your f-stop scale. So on your camera, dial a 5.6. Okay, got it? Okay, now I want you to put your camera up to your face, and I want you to point your camera someplace in your room, and I want you to rotate your shutter speed dial until your light meter scale goes right in the middle. So I gave you an f-stop, f5.6, and now I want you to rotate your shutter speed dial until the scale goes right in the middle. Put your camera up to your face, Annabella, so that you can do this. Okay, and when your scale goes right in the middle, take the picture and then yell out for me what shutter speed you got. Okay, look through your viewfinder. You got to do this through your viewfinder. You cannot do it by looking at the back of the camera. Look through the viewfinder. There you go. Did you get the
Terrible
scale?
photo.
That's okay. It's a terrible photo. Yes, I know. Okay. What shutter speed did you get, Carrie, when the light meter went right in the middle?
A 6 with quotes?
A 6 with quotes? It's dark in your room. Yeah.
It's where I'm looking at. It's
Okay.
quite dark.
6 seconds. That's a long shutter speed. These are bad photos, by the way. You are not taking great photos right now.
I was like, oh God, it's like.
Yeah. Now,
Oh,
Annabella, when you got the scale right in the middle, what shutter speed did you get?
Oh, the scale in the middle. I haven't moved the scale in the middle.
Okay, look through the viewfinder. You can only do this looking through the viewfinder. You can't do it on the back of the camera. Now rotate with your pointing finger. Rotate and you don't zoom or anything like that. Don't zoom anything in. Just rotate until the little scale goes right in the middle. And then when the scale goes right in the middle, push your shutter button halfway down and take all the way down and take the picture. And Carrie got 6 seconds. So that tells you that it's somewhere around a 20th of a second or a 30th of a second, something like that. It's a long time. What'd you get, Carrie? Do it again.
When I did it on the other of the brighter side of the room, it was the 1.6.
Good. That's about right for inside. Annabella, that gives you kind of an idea that you're going someplace around a 1/3 of a second or a 1/4 of a second, somewhere around there. And when you get it right in the middle, you see it moving, Annabella?
No.
And if it's not moving, rotate the dial the other. Go
Other
ahead.
direction, just the dial without pressing the AV, right?
Correct, just the dial. We've already set the f-stop to 5.6. And then Carrie, do the same thing. Point your camera around the room, point your camera down at the dog, try to photograph the dog. And you've got to balance it though, remember. So what number puts it right in the middle, Annabella? So what's the shutter speed you've got right now showing on your camera?
0.5.
Okay, did it go right in the middle with 0.5? Keep your camera up to your eye and rotate that until it goes right in the middle and then take the picture real fast.
I must have shaky hands.
Pardon?
I must have shaky hands.
No, it's
Some of
just,
my pictures are very fuzzy.
it's just a slow shutter speed inside. Yeah, what'd you get, Annabella?
Oh, okay. Not yet.
Almost, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, click. As soon as you get it right in the middle, click. Good. Now these are very simple. What'd you get?
2 quotes.
2 quotes, 2 seconds. Point the camera up at the light and see if you can get a little faster shutter speed. So point the camera up at the light. Shouldn't have to do too much adjusting, and then rotate that scale right back into the middle.
Yeah.
And take the picture again. Do the same thing, Carrie. Point it up at the light.
I keep pointing it at my dog and he moves. So he moves between the shutter and it's quite entertaining.
I know it. I know. Lots of blurred pictures. Lots of blurred pictures. Yes. Yes. So when you pointed at Annabella at the light, what shutter speed did you get?
1/8.
Good. 1/8 of a second. Okay. And when you pointed at Carrie at the light, what shutter speed did you get?
When I pointed it right at the light,
Yeah.
I had to keep scrolling for a while to get the balance, but I got it at a 2.
2. Okay. And then take the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now these aren't great, but congratulations, pat yourself on the back. You just balanced your light meter. Okay, and the pictures don't look great because we're in dark rooms, and inside your shutter speed is usually very slow because we just don't have a lot of light. It's okay for our human eye, but for photography, we just don't have much light inside. And so both of you all, congratulations, you balanced your light meter. And so now you've learned how to do that. And we've only been together for an hour, a little less than an hour and a half. So shutter speeds, 15th of a second if something is gently moving. And gently moving, what I mean by that is that little branch is just barely moving. 60th of a second, though, is what we need for those little furry critters that live in our house. So 60th of a second is what we need for a living creature. So any living creature that's got eyes, it's looking at us, not moving, it's just looking at us, we've got to have at least a 60th of a second shutter speed to stop them, to stop their movement. So that's anytime that we're looking at kids, or we're looking at grandmother, or we're looking at cats or dogs or anything, we've got to have at least that 60th of a second, not jumping up and down, just looking at us, just breathing, smiling, looking at us. And you notice in this photograph that Socks's eyes are in sharp focus. You see that? So now you need to learn how to move your focus point around, because you have 9 focus points that you can choose. So on this photograph of Socks, I have turned my camera vertical and I am using the top focus point. So in addition to dialing in your f-stop and dialing in your shutter speed, you've also got to get fairly fast at moving your focus points. So both of you, it is this little button on the back side of your camera, top most right-hand button on the back of your camera. Annabella, you see where that is on your camera? So it's this top, it's a rectangle with some little dots in the middle of it. We push that with our thumb and then rotate your front dial once again. So we have another dial or another button that's being pushed, and then using your front dial. And that rotates your focus points around this little circle. See that?
Yeah.
And you can watch it right on the back of your camera if you want to. But if you have all the focus points activated, the camera is choosing one. It just looks like you have them all activated. You as a photographer should be choosing where you want the focus point to be. So I always choose, I'm still using autofocus, but I'm choosing which one of those little rectangles I want to use. And so I'm moving those around constantly. Another reason that thumb's got to be pretty limber on the back of your camera. So you're changing your f-stop with your thumb and you're changing your focus point with your thumb. Okay. Do you see how it's moving, Annabella?
Yes.
Good, 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 good. So in this photograph of the lioness, she's down in the grass in Africa. And my guide is telling me that as soon as she hears the male lion, she's going to raise her head up, she's going to look around, and she's going to leave. So get ready, because she's not going to stay very long. So that tells me, okay, my lens, I'm using her head, how close I am to her. I need to put a top focus point activated. So I push that button, I activate my top focus point. And now as she starts raising her head, I move the camera so that focus point's on her eye. Because if the eye of our subject is not in focus, it drives us crazy as humans. We like the eye to be in focus. Carrie chasing those parrots, I got the center focus point because that's just the easiest one. And so it all depends on where your subject is. But moving that focus point around makes your photo look a lot more interesting. Okay, so you've got to learn how to move those focus points around. And wherever you put that focus point, that's where your camera is going to focus. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so man on the horse in a parade would be about 250th of a second. And you see in this photograph, I've got the focus point up on his face, not on his hand, up on his face. And so I'm using that top focus point once again to keep the focus where I want it to be. Photography is very much a control thing. If you happen to be a control freak, you're going to love photography because we control where we focus, where we have our viewer looking. So that top focus point up on the man on the horse, but I've got to have a 250th of a second. 250th of a second is what I need also for the little guy in a swing. Now, he's not a big kid, he's a little kid, and he's swinging. And all that I'm doing is I have that little top focus point activated. I'm swinging him, putting the camera back up to my eye, click, 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 swinging him again, putting the camera back up to my eye. And you notice how I'm designing the photograph so that the background is a long, long way away from my subject. And that allows that background to be blown out of focus. So we're choosing where we position our subject and how we want our photograph to look. And then you see here how the blue-gray tanager down in Costa Rica, he's off to the side. And so by using that focus point off to the side and the shutter speed of 250th of a second, because he doesn't move very fast, this allows me to make the photo look a lot more interesting. So we always don't want the area in focus to be right in the center of the photograph. That's pretty dull. So putting it off to the side and using that focus point off to the side. And then 500th of a second, that's what we need for the fluking whale. 500th of a second, that's what we need for somebody who's running, or that's what we need for a bird that's flying. This is going to be our starting point. But if you look at the photograph of the whale's tail, you see how the water is forming balls where it's splashing. You see that? So water forms balls at 500th of a second. Water blurs at an 1/8 of a second. Water forms balls at 500th of a second. So in this case with the whale, I knew that I wanted to get that splash to be definite. And so I used a 500th of a second shutter speed for that. So shutter speed stops movement. To get my 500th of a second, in this case with the whale's tail, I needed to also decrease my f-stop. So I'm giving up my f-stop to get my shutter speed. It's a trade-off sometimes that we have to use.
Is this also where you get those specialty lenses so that you can get a little bit more f-stop with that shutter speed?
But remember, if I get a little more f-stop with that shutter speed, then I'm getting less depth of field. So you bring me right to my next point.
Oh, okay. So like I look at your
Sometimes-
picture and it seems pretty darn like there's a fair bit of detail in that.
There's a fair amount of
More past
detail.
The shutter is going.
And so sometimes we need more shutter speed than we can get based on the light, or we need more depth of field based on what the light is. This is where ISO comes in. So if you look on the back of your camera on your display panel, you have ISO should be the very last box on the right corner. And Annabella, you have an ISO button down on those 4 toggle buttons down at the bottom, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So in the event that we need a faster shutter speed than we can get for the light right now, or in the event that I need more depth of field, and then that means I'm going to have to get my shutter speed faster, then I can raise my ISO. So right now, both of you all are set to ISO 100. So ISO 100 is the baseline for Canon cameras. That is your absolute best color, quality, and clarity. So this is your best picture is at ISO 100. If we go to ISO 200, do not change anything right now. If we go to ISO 200, then we're going to sacrifice the clarity of the photo. If we go to ISO 400, then we're going to sacrifice the clarity of the photo. If we go to ISO 800, we're going to sacrifice. So let me show you an example. If you just look at the screen for just a moment. This is when we were in Morocco out in the Sahara Desert, and we're spending the night in the Sahara Desert so that we can do some star photography away from all the city lights, way, way, way out in the dark, dark, dark. We're sleeping in these tents, and the guys have cooked dinner for us. And, you know, they're playing the drums while we're waiting for it to get real dark. Don't think I'm really roughing it, guys. There's a flush toilet in that tower. Okay, so it's not real rough. We do all have to share the same bathroom, but, you know, it's not totally roughing it. You know, we're not using holes in the ground or anything like that. But because it's nearly dark, cameras on the tripod, the fire looks really good, but to get their hands to stop, I'm going to need a faster shutter speed, and they're pretty much wiggling around with the music. So I'm going to need a pretty fast shutter speed to stop them. So that means I have to push my ISO button and raise my ISO. Now, then I can balance my light meter under those lighting conditions. Now I can get a fast shutter speed and I can still take the photograph. But if you look at it real closely, you'll see that all their hands are blurred. See that? And if I blow the picture up, you see it's pretty grainy. So this is what's called grain. This is what's called noise. But in Lightroom or Photoshop, come back, I'll teach you how to use those. We have what's called noise reduction. So I can take this noisy photograph and I can run it through noise reduction and it makes it look better. But I can't recover the hands. So anything that was blurry, like details in their clothing or their movement of their hands, I've still lost that. But the good thing about being able to raise the ISO is that when I want to take the picture, no matter what, that little doggy that you've got, Carrie, and I absolutely want to take a picture of it being cute as all get out, then that means I can raise the ISO and still get a fast enough shutter speed to stop its action. So that ISO there is there as a last resort. How grainy and noisy it is depends on your camera and depends on your tolerance for that. So if you look at this photograph of this Jaguar, I am using an ISO easily in the 4,000, 5,000 range because I'm using Canon's highest camera that they make. So the better your camera is, the better the high ISO is going to be. But you all aren't bad where you are. So I'm in a boat with 12 of my photographers. We're on photo tour. The guy in the back of the boat has got the engine going. He's standing up and we're trolling along this river, watching this Jaguar walk, because down in Pontanal, you can't get out, you know, because of the animals. You have to stay in the boat. And then the photographers are moving the boat around trying to get their shot as the Jaguar is coming in and out of the vegetation. And so the only way I'm going to be able to get a fast enough shutter speed to stop the Jaguar, plus all the movement that's going on with me. Carrie, you were saying you must be shaky because you can't hold the camera. Okay, we got to take into account our movement as well as the animal's movement. So this is like an ISO 5000, if not higher. But I'm using top of the line equipment. And so if you look at this photograph, it doesn't look too bad. Okay, we don't want to blow it up real big, but at the same time, it doesn't look too bad. But this raising the ISO means that when I take a group back to Florence and we go to my friend's cologne shop, it used to be when I would go to Florence with a group of photographers, we had to carry our tripods everywhere, and she would freak out when I brought 12 photographers in with their tripods. Where now, when we walk in, I can just say, everybody push your ISO button and go to about 5,000. And then as long as we can get a 60th of a second, we can walk around the cologne shop and not spill anything and not break anything, okay? So that ISO is there in the event you need it. So it's that kind of secret weapon. So the little boys were across the table from me. They're totally captivated at the, in their little iPhone game, whatever they're doing. The room is lit with nothing but candles. And I know that if I pick my flash up and try to take their picture, it's going to ruin the entire moment. So all that I did is put my camera on the table in front of me, kind of angle the lens up with one of my hands, raised the ISO, and I used my back live view to take photos of them. So that ISO can be raised when we need it, but otherwise keep it down at the 100 range and then as you start getting used to it, then you'll say, "Ooh, I need a faster shutter speed." Raise your ISO, and then that lets you rebalance your light meter. Okay, so it's a kind of secret weapon that we can use in the event that we need it. So the lightning photograph, is this a long shutter speed or a short shutter speed? Is this a 30-second exposure or a 4,000th of a second exposure?
4,000.
4,000? What you think, Annabella?
Um, 4,000.
4,000, y'all think fast. This is a slow shutter speed. Because if I used a real fast shutter speed, I'd get one little fragment of the lightning. But if I use a 30-second exposure, as the lightning snakes across the sky, I get the whole bolt.
Right.
So it's a long shutter speed in this case so that I can get the light as it dances across the sky. This is the monsoon summer rains in Big Bend National Park. Amazing place. Is this a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed? Fast? Why, Carrie? Why is it a fast?
Well, I think she's jumping.
She's jumping,
Or
exactly.
running. So that
Yeah.
makes me think it's
Not
I mean,
that
not as fast as a whale, but not as slow as, walking in Venice.
Okay, what you think, Annabella?
I would say a 500.
500? This is your 4,000.
Oh,
Yeah. And you notice that
4,000.
I'm out on some island somewhere. I got plenty of light. I can easily go to 4,000. And I'm watching this acrobat. She's an acrobat from Ukraine. I'm watching her flip and twist and tumble. And I ask, "Can I photograph you?" And she says, "Sure." And so I push my ISO button and raise my ISO because I know that we've got a lot of sunlight. I take my f-stop down to 5.6, and that gives me, a pretty fast shutter speed. And I say, "Okay, go." Now we don't even speak the same language. And she twists and flips and turns for me. It's amazing, but I totally miss it because I have no idea what in the heck she's going to do. So I have to ask her, "Would you please do that again?" So the more we know about what our subject is going to do, the better photographer we're going to be. And she did it, and she flipped and twisted and turned for me and another time, and I got her. But this is that predetermining, okay, how fast am I going to need based on what I just saw? So the better you are at your subject, the better you'll be at photographing that subject. So if we're in something like a gymnasium and we're watching the girls on color guard throw their flags in the air, don't think that you always have to stop every bit of motion. So this, from watching the girls do color guard, I knew that they got points for standing very still and then throwing colorful things in the air. So I decided I would photograph them with a slow shutter speed while they were standing still and then blur the flags out. And then the same thing with these dancers in Costa Rica. I've got stage lights, so I got plenty of lights. I've got the lights of San Jose behind me. So I need enough to stop the young men who are singing, but I don't need so fast that I stop all the dresses. Because if I have a little bit of movement in the dresses, it shows how fast they're going. Okay. So it's a little trade-off that we're making here and there. So you don't always feel like you've got to be as fast as you possibly can, but we might have to raise the ISO to get us to where we're going. So now let me teach you about histograms, and then I'll let you all get on out of here for the evening. If you would, the photo that you took when you pointed your camera at your light, would you bring that up on the back of your camera? So the one that you took when you were photographing your light. And now push your INFO button or your DSP button until you see a scale, your histogram scale. So you should see your picture small and the histogram scale on the side. Do you see it, Carrie?
I do, and I get like a red, green, blue scale as well.
Okay, push it one more time and you'll get just a black and white scale as opposed to a red, green scale, red, green, blue scale.
Yeah, I get it. Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
you got it?
There's so much info I can get.
Oh yeah, so much info. Did you get it, Annabella?
No,
No?
I got the picture and then what?
Okay, so pull the picture up. Now push either your INFO button 3 times or push your DISP button 3 times.
Okay.
Okay, now you see the graph? Yay,
Yes.
I see it. Okay, this is called the histogram. And what a histogram is, you probably learned about it someplace in school, but you might not use these in real life anymore, but in photography, we use them all the time. So what a histogram is if the camera took this picture of the cat asleep on the couch, converted it to black and white, and then separated all possible colors. There would be 256 possible shades of black and white. And then it graphed it to say, okay, I got a lot of this color, but not so much of this color, and a lot of this color, but not so much of this color. That's what a histogram is. The only thing that really matters to us is whether the histogram goes from the left corner to the right corner. So we want a histogram that goes all the way across. If it doesn't go all the way across, then that means we missed some colors. If it goes all the way across, then we captured all the possible colors in that photograph. So that means we got all 64 crayons in the crayon box if it goes all the way across, okay? So what we're looking for is a histogram that goes all the way across. But that histogram of your light overhead, you have a spike up the right side. The left side is the blackest black and the right side is the whitest white color. So over on the right side of your histogram, you've got a spike going up the right side, don't you? And do you also have a corresponding blink going on your photograph? Yeah, there's a blink going on in your photograph. Okay, the blink is where there is no color. So these are called the highlight indicators. So wherever it's blinking, it's trying to warn you that I got a problem here because there's no color here. Now look at my screen for just a moment and let me explain how this is practical, because you all have a really rotten photograph there, but now I want to show you how it's practical. So I'm in this bookstore and I see this really neat cat. I'm a cat person, as you figured this out. I see this really neat cat and he's asleep on this couch. And there is sun coming through that window back there in the top left-hand corner, top left. And I want that sun coming through that window. So I just want it to be bright in that top left-hand corner. So I turn my camera vertical, focus on the cat, dial in my f-stop, dial in my shutter speed, get my light meter balanced, and I take my picture. And then the top histogram is what I end up getting. But it's blinking up there in that top left-hand corner. But the floor is also blinking. The couch is also blinking, and the whole cat's blinking. So that means I way overexposed this photograph. So for this picture, I'm going to retake it because my histogram tells me I got a lot of problems here. So I'm going to retake it, but instead of balancing the light meter, I'm going to underexpose by 1. I'm going to balance it 1 big mark toward the negative because the light's too bright in my photograph. So instead of balancing the light meter, I'm going to put the light meter 1 toward the negative.
And is it just 1 notch towards the negative, or like you want to go, if once I'm centered, go to the 1?
Go to the 1.
Go to the number 1, not the
Yeah,
first notch.
because I got a massive problem here.
Okay, cool.
So this tells me let's go all the way to the 1. So turn the camera vertical, refocus on the cat, take the picture again. Look at the back. Whoa. Window's blinking. I know that. That's okay. The window's blinking. That's my creative part. The floor is not blinking. Couch isn't blinking anymore, but the cat still blinks. So the cat's still overexposed. There's no fur on the cat in this photograph. So instead of me balancing the light meter in the middle or going 1 under, I'm going to go 2 under. And then I'm going to recompose, rebalance my light meter, focus on that cat again, and now take the picture again. And now what I get is the corners blinking, but I know that. That's my creativity. The floor is not blinking, the couch is not blinking, and now that we've got fur on the cat, cat's not blinking. And so that histogram and that highlight indicator, that little screen that you're looking at right there, that's the screen we should be looking at when we look at the picture on the back of our camera. Because if we need to take the picture again, we'll see some highlight indicators, we'll see that spike up on the right side, and we can only see it after we take the picture, not before we take the picture. And so sometimes as you develop your skill, you're going to start looking at a picture that you want to take and you're going to say, that's going to overexpose. That's going to be too bright. I'm going to start underexposed by 1. Or if you get a histogram like on the bottom and the right side does not go all the way to the right, you might want to overexpose. So that histogram is telling us if we're in the right zone, in the right neighborhood for this photograph. And after a while, you'll develop an eye for this. This is too dark. This is too light. You know, I'm going to need to overexpose or underexpose. Remember with that shrimp boat in the sun, I told you that I did one thing, and that was that I underexposed to make it a little bit darker and a little bit more of a silhouette. And so that histogram and that highlight indicator are what you need to confirm that where you balanced your light meter is the correct spot to get your photograph. Make sense?
Yeah, I sure wish I knew that before I went to Iceland.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because there's a lot of stuff in Iceland that you would have overexposed. Absolutely right.
On my memory card, it's from like an old trip. So since my like light photos make 0 sense, I was scanning over to see what they did. And if they glitched, and like, these histograms are awful.
Yep, exactly. And see, now you're talking photography talk. This histogram's horrible. Yeah. So if I'm shooting with you in the field, I want to see your histogram.
Yeah.
Then we can look at expressions and that type of stuff. So this is your confirmation that you got all the details. Questions, Annabelle?
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay. So you all have, so this is the screen, this is a Nikon screen, but this is a screen that you all will look at. Okay, so you all have a homework assignment. And your homework assignment is that you are going to photograph some water. And then I've given you the settings to use, and just realize that depending on how much light you have, it might be too much or it might not be enough, but just work with it. If you want to make this simple and you don't have a fountain in your neighborhood, or you don't have a fountain in your backyard or a swimming pool or something like that, you could use a garden hose. This works perfectly fine. Don't use one of those sprayers that kind of mist sprays because you won't be able to see anything. But if you just want to hang a garden hose over a hook outside and use that, you can use that. But you have to put your camera on something solid. So if you have a tripod, use that. If not, just put your camera on a stool or something like that. So you want to keep it steady. You want to keep all the pictures uniform. And as you balance your light meter at the different settings, if you did it right, all your pictures will look exactly alike, but you'll see the water blur or the water get solid. And then you're going to place something on a stool outside, and you're going to have it 8, 10, 15, 20 feet from its background. So the further your background, the better it's going to be. Further from the background, the better it's going to be. And then you're going to stay stationary on your tripod or your stool. And then you're going to move through the f-stop scale, rebalancing your light meter each time with your shutter speed. And if you do it right, your background will go from blurry to clearer as you move through the f-stop scale. Tomorrow, when I send you the recording for this, I'll also send you a link to my Dropbox, and you can put your photos in my Dropbox, and then I'll show them next week when we come back together. If you have another file transfer site, like you have your own Dropbox or you have WeTransfer or something like that, feel free to send me a link if it's easier for you to do it that way. But if you want to use my Dropbox, you can. Okay. So I'll send you the recording tomorrow of this. I'll send you a link to my Dropbox so you can upload your photographs. And then I will send you a new Zoom link for next week's class so that we can go into next week's class. And then next week I'll meet you the same time, same place, 7 o'clock. If you have any questions as you're working on your homework, I'm here. So just email me and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. Okay. Cool. Questions before I leave you?
No, I gotta get my hands dirty.
Okay.
I'm excited to play.
Yeah, you get to play. So right now the information is tenuous in your head, but hopefully after you do your homework assignment, it'll start making a lot more sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I will see you all next week.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
Kathy.
Good night. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Night.